I came home a day early, and from the hallway I heard my son laugh on the phone. "Yeah, man, the old lady's getting loopy. It's almost over." That's when I knew. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was his burden. So I stayed quiet. I played along. And while they thought I was fading, I was planning. My name is Gloria Mays. I'm 71 years old, a retired ER head nurse, and a widow of 12 years. I've spent my whole life saving lives, holding hands through grief, and believing, foolishly, that family would always do the same for me. The wind in Albany that day had a sharpness to it, an early warning of autumn creeping in. I remember it because it was the kind of wind that used to make Vincent reach for my hand, saying it gave him an excuse to hold it. That memory stayed with me as the bus rolled into the terminal 3 hours ahead of schedule. My flight from South Carolina had been canceled due to some mechanical issue, and rather than wait for another one the next day, I decided to take the long ride home by road. I didn't call ahead. I wanted it to be a sweet surprise. Ethan and Brielle had been staying at the house while I was away looking after the garden and collecting the mail. I thought a quiet return might bring a small spark of joy, a moment of unexpected warmth. A mother coming home to a house filled with familiar faces and soft laughter. I pictured it in my mind. Ethan lifting his head from the TV and calling out, "Mom," his voice filled with that childlike affection that never completely leaves a boy. Brielle walking over, arms open, saying how much she missed my cooking. I imagined the smell of something baking, the hum of music, the clutter of 2 people making a house feel alive. The thought made me smile as I stepped out of the cab. I paid the driver, thanked him, and pulled my suitcase up the sidewalk. My home stood in its usual quiet dignity, the front porch bathed in the golden light of the porch lamp I always left on. Vincent and I bought this house 45 years ago. He laid the stones of the walkway himself, one by one, grumbling the whole time and singing off-key while he did it. I remember thinking as I climbed the steps that the house looked just as we left it, safe, waiting. But as my foot touched the first wooden board of the porch, something shifted. A strange hush, not peaceful, intentional. I froze. Something in the stillness felt wrong. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something being hidden. I set my suitcase down slowly, gently, without the usual thud. I took each step quietly, the way one might walk into a hospital room in the middle of the night. The kitchen window was cracked open. Just an inch, just enough to let air flow or a voice escape. And that's when I heard her. Brielle. Her voice wasn't hushed in fear or urgency. It was calm, calculated, the kind of calm that chills you more than shouting ever could. "Just keep adding the drops," she said. "Soon she'll be gone and we can finally get this place sold." I didn't breathe. I couldn't. The words didn't enter my ears so much as they sliced through me sharp and clean, leaving behind something broken. I couldn't see her, but I could hear everything. The casual cruelty, the clinical tone, as if she were reading instructions off a box. My knees buckled slightly. I held on to the railing. My house, the house I raised Ethan in, was being discussed like a transaction. And me. Soon she'll be gone. I stood there on the edge of the porch, half in light, half in shadow. In that moment, everything I believed about my family, about safety, about love, wavered. I waited, hoping, no begging, to hear Ethan say something. Anything. He did. A pause, then a weak murmur. "Is that really necessary?" Brielle's answer was swift. "It has to look real. She's already getting forgetful. If there's no record, no proof, we won't get full guardianship." Guardianship. That word crashed into me like a freight train. My name, my life reduced to a legal term. All those nights I'd stayed up with Ethan when he had chickenpox. All the double shifts I worked to help him through college. The meals I'd cooked from scratch, the hugs I gave when he cried over breakups or job rejections, all erased by one word: guardianship. The silence that followed was more telling than any argument. Ethan didn't object. He didn't protest. He didn't defend me. His silence was his consent. My stomach twisted, not just from pain, but from clarity. Clarity has a cruel way of arriving, doesn't it? Never when you want it. Never gently. I steadied myself. My hands were shaking, but I smoothed the front of my coat like I always did before walking into a difficult ER shift. I practiced my smile. Just once. I tucked every emotion, every scream, every ounce of heartbreak into the back corner of my soul, behind the smile, behind the mother they thought they knew. Then I opened the front door. Surprise, I called out, my voice light, easy. Flight was canceled. Thought I'd take the scenic route home. The warmth in my tone was a lie I told for survival. Brielle rushed in with a squeal, wrapping her arms around me. Gloria, we weren't expecting you. Her perfume was floral and sweet, but her hug was ice. She had no idea I'd already heard the truth. That hug. It was the first time I felt what betrayal physically feels like. It's cold, not angry, not hot. Just cold. It numbs your fingertips and settles behind your ribs. The curtain had just gone up. The show was starting. And I was no longer the mother coming home. I was the lead in a role I never auditioned for, the old woman they planned to disappear. But I had other plans. Brielle was always good at pretending. She had that bright, airy voice women use when they're playing the part of the thoughtful daughter-in-law. After the initial surprise of my arrival wore off, she ushered me into the living room, fluffed the pillows around me like I was a guest in a hotel rather than the owner of the home, and said, "You must be exhausted from the trip. Gloria, let me make you something warm. Just a little tea to help you relax." I didn't argue. I nodded, smiled gently, and leaned back in the chair. My eyes wandered around the living room, taking in what had changed and what hadn't. The throw blanket I'd always kept folded over the arm of the couch was gone, replaced by a sleek gray one that matched nothing. A magazine I didn't subscribe to sat on the coffee table. And the family photo that used to sit on the mantel. Me, Vincent, and a gap-toothed Ethan at age 7 was missing. I heard Brielle in the kitchen, the clink of a spoon against a ceramic mug, the soft whistle of the kettle. She returned with a cup of chamomile tea. At least that's what she said it was. "This always helps me sleep," she chirped, setting it gently into my hands like a gift. A little honey, a little lavender, just what the body needs after a long day. The warmth of the mug spread through my fingers, but something about the scent made me pause. Underneath the sweetness, beneath the floral comforting notes, there was something else, something chemical bitter, like the ghost of a pill crushed too finely. It lingered in the steam like a whisper you couldn't quite catch. I was a nurse for over 40 years. My hands may have aged, but my nose had not. I knew that smell. I'd cleaned bedsides where patients had been over-medicated. I'd administered enough sedatives in my time to recognize the aftertaste of manipulation. And that's exactly what this was. Not a mistake, not an accident. It was careful, controlled. She was testing me. I brought the mug to my lips and took the smallest sip, just enough to wet my tongue. The taste confirmed what I already suspected. Not enough to knock me out. Not yet. But enough to cloud memory. Enough to make someone stumble over a sentence or forget a name. I looked up at Brielle and gave her the same smile I used to give nervous interns in the ER. Kind, gracious, and utterly unreadable. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. "This is lovely." I took one more sip and then set the cup down on the table beside me, careful not to spill, careful not to grimace. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. Watched. Brielle didn't sit. She flitted about pretending to tidy up, but I saw the glances, quick flicks of her eyes toward me, checking for signs. Checking if the drops had done their work. They hadn't. Not yet. But she would keep trying. That evening over dinner, I played my part. The kitchen no longer smelled like food. It smelled like disinfectant and lemon-scented cleaner. The warmth that used to greet me when I came in from a long shift. Vincent stirring gumbo on the stove, Miles Davis playing softly in the background, was gone. In its place was the sterile order of Brielle's making. She served plain grilled chicken breast and steamed broccoli. No seasoning, no flavor, just fuel. Ethan sat at the head of the table where Vincent used to sit. He chewed mechanically, eyes half-focused on his phone. I let my fork slip from my hand. It clattered to the hardwood with a sharp, startling ring. I jolted back in my seat slightly and blinked at it. "Oh dear," I said softly. "I don't know what's wrong with me lately." Ethan looked up. Brielle froze. "It's okay, Mom," Ethan said, picking up the fork for me. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. A few minutes later, I asked a question I already knew the answer to. "Has Mrs. Landry's cat come back yet?" Ethan hesitated. I watched the confusion flicker across his face. Then he recovered. Yeah, he's fine. She said he came back last week." I nodded slowly. "That's good. I was worried. I had sent Mrs. Landry a sympathy card when that cat died 6 months ago." The card was still in my desk drawer. The one Brielle probably hadn't bothered to search yet. As we ate in silence, I glanced up and caught them exchanging a look. The kind of look people give each other when their plan is going exactly as they hoped. They thought it was working. They believed I was slipping, forgetful, vulnerable, exactly what they needed me to be. I chewed slowly, feeling the dry chicken scrape across my tongue, and thought about the strange flavor in the tea. I thought about the word guardianship and how quickly it had reduced me from mother to burden. But mostly I thought about how much more convincing I could be than they ever imagined. If they wanted an old woman fading quietly into the background, I would give them one. But not for the reasons they thought. I smiled down at my plate and made a mental note 1 teaspoon of honey masked the bitterness best. They believed they were the ones orchestrating the story, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. The performance had just begun. The next morning began with sunlight that didn't feel warm. It was the kind of light that made everything look washed out like a hospital room where the walls are painted in soft beige and everyone speaks in low voices. I stood at the kitchen window sipping a cup of coffee that tasted like nothing. Not because it wasn't brewed well, but because I had lost the taste for comfort. I walked slowly into the living room, drawn by a quiet stillness that didn't belong. Something in the air felt lighter too light, like something had been taken out of the space. Then I saw it. The mantle. The photographs. Gone. Every last one. The framed picture of my wedding day. Vincent's arm around me, his eyes lit with that mischievous smile he used to have. The snapshot of Ethan at age 4 with cake on his nose. The family reunion photo where my sister had worn her church hat even though it was 90 degrees outside. Vanished. In their place were minimalist prints, 3 abstract pieces in muted gray and beige. Not a single face, not a single memory. Brielle walked in behind me, a box in her arms. "Oh, Gloria, I didn't mean to startle you," she said with her usual sugarcoating. "I was just clearing out some of the clutter. The house feels too dated. Don't worry, the photos are safe in a box in the garage." She didn't even look up. She walked past me like I was furniture, setting the box on the floor beside the coat closet, and dusting her hands like she'd just finished a chore. Clutter. That was the word she used. 40 years of birthdays, graduations, holidays, ordinary Tuesdays, frozen in film. Reduced to clutter. I turned to the corner where Vincent's old record player used to sit, the one he called the Cadillac of turntables. It was gone too. In its place sat a small, sleek Bluetooth speaker. White, soulless, modern. A smooth, cylindrical thing that blinked when you spoke to it. I knew that in Brielle's world that speaker was an upgrade, but to me it felt like a tombstone. I went upstairs hoping to gather myself, only to find the rotary phone, my lifeline to the outside world. Silent, no dial tone. I picked up the receiver, pressed it to my ear. Nothing. Brielle breezed by with a load of laundry in her arms. Oh, I had the landline disconnected, she said. No one uses those anymore. It's just an extra bill. I nodded slowly as if it made sense. Later that afternoon, I asked for my cell phone. It's charging in my room, Brielle replied with a quick smile. I'll bring it to you later, okay? She didn't. It was a clean, seamless orchestration. One line cut, one excuse, one gentle lie after another. And suddenly the only person I could call was her. So, after dinner, I reached for the doorknob to take a walk just around the block. The evening air had always helped me clear my head. Ethan stopped me. Mom, he said gently, placing a hand on my forearm. Why don't you rest tonight? You've been looking a little tired today. Let me know if you need anything, I'll take care of it. He didn't say no. He didn't raise his voice, but he didn't move his hand from the door either. And just like that, the message was clear. They didn't want me dead. They wanted me gone. Not in body, just in presence, in voice, in independence. They didn't need a funeral. They needed a signature. A story that ended before I had a chance to write the last chapter myself. I stood still, letting Ethan's hand linger for just a second longer than it needed to. Then I smiled, softly, the way I used to when he was 5 and thought he'd hidden a cookie behind his back. He thought I didn't see. But I saw everything. What they were building wasn't a prison with bars. It was a stage. One where I would play the role of fading matriarch. Where I would nod, politely forget names, and eventually agree to things I never truly understood. They were erasing me one quiet decision at a time. And I realized then, it was working. Not because I was losing my mind, but because they were making sure no one else would hear it. I had no phone, no photos, no music, no mail, no walk. They were closing the world in around me, replacing it with a silence that felt almost loving. Almost. I walked back to the living room, sat on the sofa that used to hold years of laughter and spilled drinks and quiet afternoon naps. I sat in the silence they had created, the sterilized, curated void of their version of my life. But in my mind I heard Vincent's voice, quiet but firm. They only win if you play the role they wrote. And so I wouldn't. Not yet. I wasn't gone. Not even close. There's a particular kind of silence that settles into a house, not the peaceful quiet of early morning or the hush that follows a good night's sleep. No, this silence was different. It was thick, intentional, like the padded walls of a place meant to contain something dangerous, or in my case, something they thought was disappearing. It began, I suppose, the day I stopped trying to speak. It wasn't a dramatic moment, no grand announcement, no final argument. I just woke up one morning and realized nothing I said changed anything. So I didn't say anything at all. Brielle didn't notice at first. She never really waited for answers, only confirmations of what she'd already decided. Would you like your tea hot or lukewarm, Gloria? She'd ask, already pouring from the kettle. Let's go with herbal tonight. Chamomile's best for people your age. I stopped replying. She took it as consent. That first morning, she set the mug in front of me with a syrupy smile and walked away, humming some saccharine pop song that grated against the old rhythm of this house. I stared at the steam curling from the cup like fingers reaching for a throat. I didn't drink it. Not right away. I waited until she turned her back, then took the smallest sip I could manage. Just enough to taste the bitterness behind the honey. Just enough to be certain. They were still adding the drops. At lunch, the same pattern repeated. Let's keep things light, okay? We don't want anything upsetting your stomach. No seasoning, no warmth, no joy. Boiled chicken, steamed vegetables, and plain quinoa, on a colorless plate that looked more like a specimen tray than a meal. There wasn't even a pat of butter to soften the edges. It was food stripped of memory, of comfort, of identity. I'd worked in hospitals for over 4 decades. I knew bland institutional meals when I saw them, and I knew what came next. The mental decline, the fatigue, the confusion, all symptoms they'd say were age, early dementia, or stress. They'd document it, create their story. I would become the story. So I leaned into the silence. At dinner, I dropped my spoon on the floor and didn't react when Brielle sighed loudly and bent to pick it up. I gazed at the far wall while Ethan talked about refinancing and selling, pretending not to understand. When he asked me about the electric bill, I blinked and said, "What's electricity?" He laughed nervously, eyes darting to Brielle. She smiled too fast. They thought it was beginning. I was letting them think it. But the truth is, silence didn't mean surrender. It meant observation. It meant control. It meant I could finally hear everything that was really being said. One afternoon, I sat in the armchair by the front window, wrapped in a shawl Brielle had draped over my shoulders like I was a mannequin. I stared at the garden not because I couldn't move, but because I was learning, watching. Becoming invisible had a strange advantage. It gave me clarity. And that's when I heard Ethan. He was in the next room on the phone. His voice was casual, too casual. He had that chuckle he always used with friends. Friendly, self-important, smug. "Yeah, man," he said with a soft laugh. "The old lady's getting loopy." "It's almost over." I didn't blink, not even when he added, "Brielle's got the paperwork ready. Just need to ease her into signing. The house'll sell quick. Location's prime. The old lady, almost over." I sat still, breathing slowly, every word etching itself into my memory. Ethan wasn't just participating. He was leading. This wasn't Brielle's manipulation anymore. It was a partnership. And I was the common obstacle. A living inheritance waiting to expire. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the creaks of the house, the murmurs of wind against the window panes. I stared at the ceiling and thought about the boy I raised. The boy who once cried when he thought I'd forgotten his school lunch. The boy who used to draw me cards with "I love you, Mom" in crooked block letters. Where did he go? I remembered holding his feverish hand when he was 5. I remembered selling my mother's necklace to help pay for his college books. I remembered hugging him at Vincent's funeral, both of us sobbing in the kitchen. That son didn't exist anymore. And I couldn't afford to mourn him. Not now. Instead, I began to count the cups of tea I'd been served, count the meals stripped of flavor, count the number of days without mail, without phone calls, without contact from anyone beyond these walls. They hadn't cut me off physically. That would be too obvious. No, they'd done it quietly, gently, 1,000 paper cuts instead of a single wound. One evening, Brielle told me, "Why don't you go lie down early tonight, Gloria? You've been extra quiet today." I nodded. She took that as agreement. But I sat at the edge of my bed in the dark, thinking about patterns, about proof, about how silence could become a shield, but also a blade. From that moment on, I began cataloging everything in my mind. The time of day tea was served, the exact phrasing Ethan used when he whispered to Brielle in the hallway, the times when my phone was charging for days at a time. Silence sharpened my senses. I noticed the new pill bottle tucked behind the cereal boxes. I recognized the faint scent of rubbing alcohol mixed into the tea. I counted the number of times Brielle looked over her shoulder before slipping something into my drink. She thought she was clever. But I had faced more cunning. I had calmed mothers giving birth during hurricanes. I had consoled husbands after stillbirths. I had stayed steady while performing CPR on infants whose hearts had stopped. Brielle was not smarter than me. She was just quieter than I expected. But I could be quieter. I let the spoon fall again at dinner the next night. I looked startled. I stared at the living room wall for a full 2 minutes before blinking. Brielle whispered to Ethan that they should start researching memory care units. I heard it all, and I smiled to myself. They were building the case they needed. But I was building mine too. Every mistake I made became a brick in the wall they were constructing around me, but every mistake I witnessed became a step toward tearing it down. I just needed time, and silence gave me that. So I stayed quiet, not because I was disappearing, but because I was preparing. They wanted me voiceless. They thought it meant I had nothing left to say. They were wrong. My silence wasn't an end. It was an opening act. In the days that followed, I leaned further into my silence. It was no longer just a refuge. It was a laboratory. Each moment, each interaction became data. Something to be recorded, remembered, and eventually used. I didn't need a courtroom. I needed the truth. And I knew if I was patient, they would hand it to me. But first I needed tools. Isam. It was early one morning just before dawn when I knelt beside the cedar trunk at the foot of my bed. The air in the room was cool, heavy, with the scent of rain-soaked earth wafting through a cracked window. I hadn't opened this trunk since Vincent passed. I used to think it held only grief, but now it held possibility. I unlatched the brass clasp and lifted the lid. Inside were pieces of our life. His old leather wallet, faded ticket stubs from jazz concerts, and nestled beneath a stack of hymnals, a small gray recorder, the kind Vincent used to carry to choir rehearsals at St. Luke. He used to say he loved listening to the voices again during the week, as if the songs could hold the power to bless the house. I picked it up, brushed the dust from its ridges. It was heavier than I remembered. There were batteries inside. I pressed the record button. A red light blinked. Still alive. That morning I tucked it into the pocket of my cardigan and carried it with me like armor. Wherever I sat, it sat with me. Quiet. Patient. Listening. That very day around 3:10 p.m., I caught a conversation. Brielle was in the kitchen on the phone. She thought I was dozing in the sunroom. I sat with the recorder turned on, my eyes closed, heart racing. No, she hasn't asked about her accounts. I told her Ethan's handling it for now. She barely remembers what day it is. There was a pause, then a sharp laugh. Soon as we get that evaluation scheduled, it'll be official. After that, the house is as good as gone. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I pressed stop, waited a few minutes, and rewound it slightly to be sure the audio was clear. It was... Her voice played back with an eerie steadiness, like a news anchor reporting a tragedy she didn't feel. That night I wrote it down in a notebook. Not the floral diary Brielle had given me 2 Christmases ago, the one with gratitude every day printed in pink letters on the front. I chose an old nurse's logbook from my closet. Thin lines, hard cover, built for facts. I labeled the entry clearly March 3rd, 10 p.m. Brielle phone call recorded. Mentioned financial control and intent to schedule false evaluation. I didn't write how I felt. Feelings I had learned in all my years could be questioned. Facts could not. Each day brought more entries. I recorded whispered conversations, side glances, offhand remarks Ethan made when he thought I couldn't hear. Each one logged with time, tone, and intention. I began to build a case, not to prove my worth, but to prove their deceit. But even the best case needs witnesses. So I thought of Maxine Carter. Maxine and I had been best friends since high school. She was the kind of woman who saw through people like glass. She had held my hand through Vincent's funeral, brought me casseroles when I forgot how to eat, and stood by me when I had breast cancer 20 years ago. We hadn't spoken in nearly 2 months. Brielle always had an excuse why the phone wasn't working, or why Maxine's messages hadn't reached me. I needed to reach her. Quietly. One afternoon, while Brielle was at yoga and Ethan was working in the den, I retrieved my cell phone from where it had been hidden in their bedroom drawer, tucked under a pile of laundry like it was contraband. I turned it on, my fingers trembling. It buzzed with missed calls and voicemails. My chest tightened at the sight of Maxine's name. I didn't call her right away. Instead, I waited until I was in the garden. The only place in that house that still felt like mine. The roses Vincent had planted along the east fence were just beginning to bud, the first signs of spring defying winter's chill. I stood near them, pressed the phone to my ear, and dialed Maxine's number. She picked up on the second ring. "Max," I whispered, trying to sound weak but not afraid. "Gloria." "Oh, thank God. I can't talk long," I interrupted. "Just listen." She stopped. I could almost feel her stillness through the line. "The roses Vincent planted," I said softly, "are being choked by weeds." There was a pause. Then her voice calm but alert. "What kind of weeds? Persistent?" "Quiet. Growing fast. They're taking over." Another silence. Then, "All right. I understand. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't need to." 3 days later, I found a note under the mat by the garden gate. It was folded neatly in Maxine's familiar looping cursive. It read, "Wednesday, 9 a.m., St. Luke Church Hall. Coffee and prayer. Come alone. Bring your strength." I pressed the note to my chest, breathed in the cool morning air, and looked toward the roses. Their stems were sturdy, their roots deep, just like mine. And so in the middle of my silence, I had finally spoken. Not in words shouted across a kitchen, not in accusations or tears, but in a code only someone who truly knew me would understand. The weeds had underestimated the gardener. Now it was time to begin pulling them out one by one. St. Luke's Community Hall still smelled like weak coffee and old hymnals. The folding chairs were set up in neat rows for Wednesday's prayer group, but at this hour it was empty. Quiet, except for the distant creak of the building's old bones settling. It was the perfect place for two women of a certain age to sit with their coats on and speak in low, deliberate tones. Maxine was already there when I arrived. She stood by the window looking out onto the church courtyard, her gloved hands wrapped around a chipped porcelain mug. I saw her eyes flick toward me before she turned around fully. She didn't smile, but her gaze warmed. It was the same look she gave me when I walked into the emergency room after a night shift, hair undone, shoes soaked, soul tired. I didn't hug her. We weren't women who needed to. Instead, I took the seat across from her and pulled out my tools. The small recorder wrapped in a handkerchief and my nurse's logbook pages filled with dates, times, observations, and facts. She didn't speak until I'd placed both on the table. "That's what I thought," she said, her voice quiet but firm. I knew it wasn't about gardening. I opened the notebook to a marked page and slid it across to her. She skimmed the entry. One of the earlier ones, the first time Brielle had mentioned guardianship, as if I were a project to be taken over. "You wrote this like a chart," Maxine murmured. "I spent 40 years recording vital signs and patient behaviors," I replied. "I know how to document deterioration." "Real or faked?" She nodded. "No questions about how I felt. No gasps of sympathy. Just respect. That's why I called her." "There's someone you need to meet," she said after a pause. "His name's Noah Lynn. He's young but sharp. Son of Angela Lynn. Remember her? I used to teach Sunday school with her." I did remember Angela vaguely. A kind, steady woman with a sharp mind and a quiet strength. "He's a lawyer now," Maxine continued. "Elder protection cases, knows the system inside and out, and more importantly, his mama raised him right. He's not just smart. He's good. I didn't ask for credentials." Maxine's word was enough. That afternoon, she made the call, and 2 days later, we met Noah in a quiet corner of a diner on the east side of town. He looked barely older than Ethan. Clean cut, with kind eyes and a laptop bag slung across his chest. But the moment he sat down, he didn't treat me like a fragile grandmother. He leaned forward, hands clasped, listening. I didn't start with how I felt. I started with the facts. I opened the notebook and began not from a place of drama, but from the foundation I knew best: structure, precision, and observation. On February 14th, I said I overheard my daughter-in-law say she was administering drops into my tea. I tasted the tea. It contained a sedative. I have medical experience and recognized the taste. I flipped the page. On February 16th, I recorded a conversation in which she discussed the need to fabricate a narrative of mental decline to obtain guardianship. My son did not object. I kept going. I included the details of my isolation. The confiscated phone, the disconnected landline, the strange meals, the slow erasure of my home. I showed him the transcript I'd written up of Ethan's call. The old lady's getting loopy. I didn't shake. I didn't stutter. I presented my life like I would present a trauma report in the ER. Succinct, exact, undeniable. When I finished, there was a long silence. Noah didn't interrupt. He closed his notebook, took a deep breath, and met my eyes. "Mrs. Mays," he said, his voice steady, "you've already done the hardest part." I blinked. "Which part is that, believing yourself? Then proving it." He laid out the plan step by step like a blueprint. "First, we need a third-party psychological evaluation," he said. "Independent. Someone who has no ties to your family, no loyalty to your son. That evaluation will be the foundation of our case." I nodded. "I can get to an appointment if you help me arrange a way out. I've been confined. They won't let me go anywhere unless they're watching." "We'll handle that," he said with a small smile. "I have people," he continued. "Second, we establish a new will and, more importantly, an irrevocable trust. That way they can't access your estate even if they somehow pressure you. Your assets become untouchable, locked down." He didn't speak in riddles. He didn't sugarcoat. "Third, we gather more evidence. Quietly. Any document, financial paper, email, voicemail. Anything showing intent, coercion, or manipulation." I looked down at my hands. They were trembling not with fear but with focus. "I've been pretending," I said, acting confused. Forgetting things I know. It was the only way to buy time. "Then you're ahead of most people who come to me," he replied. "You're not a victim, Mrs. Mays. You're a strategist." For the first time in weeks, I felt a breath settle in my lungs without weight. I wasn't alone. I had Maxine. I had Noah. I had a plan. "I won't stop them today," I said. "But I will stop them." Noah leaned forward. "You won't have to stop them alone." That afternoon, I returned home before Brielle, my face carefully composed. I slipped my notebook back under the lining of my coat, tucked the recorder deep in its pocket. To them, I was still the woman losing her grip. But I had just built a fortress, and this time I wouldn't be the one locked inside it. The hardest part was making my hand tremble just enough to pass as unsteady. It had to be believable, unmistakably written by a woman unraveling. I took my time sitting at my desk with a lamp turned low and a cup of chamomile beside me. I dipped my pen in slow, exaggerated motions. I crossed letters where I never would have before. I added extra loops and left words unfinished. I made myself look lost on the page. The letter had to feel real, not just in words but in essence. They needed to believe I was reaching out from a fog of confusion and sentiment, that I was weak, that I trusted them. I wrote Ethan I had the strangest dream last night. Your father came to me. Vincent. He said he left something important in the family Bible. I can't quite remember what it was, but he said it was for us. Maybe something about an old insurance policy, I'm not sure. I'm too tired to go looking. I thought maybe you could check for me. I trust you more than anyone in the world. Each word tasted bitter in my mouth. When I finished, I folded the letter carefully, placed it in an envelope, and left it in plain sight. On the hall table, right where Ethan would see it when he came home from the gym. Then I went upstairs not to sleep but to prepare. I had already tucked the small silver recorder deep into the couch cushions earlier that afternoon. Its tiny red light was buried under a throw pillow. I sat in the dark of my bedroom door, cracked open, just enough ears straining. It didn't take long. I heard footsteps. The soft rustle of paper. Then Ethan's voice. "Mom left me a letter," he muttered. She says she dreamt about Dad hiding something in the Bible. There was a pause, then Brielle's unmistakable cackle. Harsh, disbelieving. "Oh my God, she's completely gone," she said between laughs. "Dreams, Bibles." "What is she?" 80 going on 12. "Should I look?" Ethan asked, half amused. "Of course look," Brielle snapped. "We'll tell her it wasn't there, and if there's anything real, we'll just cash it ourselves. She won't remember a thing by morning." I heard the sound of drawers opening, boxes being moved, the low hum of greed humming through the walls. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. I could picture Brielle with her sleeves rolled up, searching like a scavenger. Not for meaning, not for memory, for money. Eventually, Ethan's voice returned, this time quieter. "I found it. It's in the trunk in her room." Great Brielle said, the floorboards creaking as she followed. "Let's shake it loose." I held my breath. The Bible they were handling wasn't just a book. It had belonged to my grandmother. Its spine was soft from decades of cradling the pages, lined with notes and dates, births and weddings and funerals, written in the soft cursive of generations of women who came before me. That book had survived 4 moves, 2 floods, and the test of time. It carried our story. I heard a sharp intake of breath. "There's a piece of paper in here," Ethan said. Silence. Then the slow, puzzled sound of him reading. To my Gloria, his voice stumbled. "Our greatest legacy is not in any policy or bank account. It is in the heart and integrity of our son. I hope he always remembers that." There was a beat of silence. Then Brielle's voice broke through again, flat with disappointment. "Ugh, that's it. No policy. Just more sentimental garbage." She laughed again. But this time it sounded different. Sharper, shorter, a brittle thing that cracked at the edges. I closed my eyes. They had no idea they had just walked straight into the snare. The recorder, now filled with their laughter and their plotting, held more than sound. It held intent. And intent paired with opportunity and motive is what turns suspicion into evidence. It was never about the insurance policy. It was about the choice they would make when they thought no one was watching. When they believed I was feeble and forgetful and had handed them access to my most sacred space. Vincent's note was real, of course. I had placed it there years ago, long before he passed. We wrote letters to each other often, sometimes hiding them in books drawers and coat pockets, just to surprise the other. That one had been a quiet memento, until it became a quiet sword. They had failed the test. They didn't choose compassion. They didn't honor legacy. They chose greed. And now I had their choice etched into magnetic tape. Later that night, I lay in bed and thought of Vincent. I remembered the way he used to say, "When people show you who they are when no one's looking, believe them the first time." I had believed in my son longer than I should have. But tonight, I had the truth. Undeniable, recorded, and clear. The trap was set, and they had walked straight into it. I wasn't done yet, but the balance had shifted. They still believed they were in control. Still believed I was their fool, their burden, their stepping stone to something bigger. Let them think that, because soon they would see just how dangerous a quiet, patient woman can be when she's had enough. The sun barely broke through the clouds that morning. The sky above Albany was a dull sheet of gray, like the calm before a storm, or the silence that settles just before a verdict is read. I remember standing in front of the mirror for a long time, longer than I had in weeks, maybe months. I brushed my hair back into a soft twist, pinned it in place, and reached for the deep plum dress that I hadn't worn since Vincent's memorial. It wasn't for mourning today. It was for dignity, for quiet power. Maxine picked me up in her sensible silver sedan. She didn't say much during the ride. She didn't need to. Her presence beside me was steady, like a hand pressed between my shoulder blades, reminding me to keep breathing, keep walking, keep standing tall. As we pulled up to the law office, Noah's office, I noticed a sleek black SUV already parked out front, Ethan's, and beside it Brielle's compact crossover, the one with the smug bumper sticker that read, "Good vibes only." Inside the waiting area was silent, save for the low tick of a wall clock. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes, nodded as we entered. "Right this way, Mrs. Mays." "They're already in the conference room." Of course they were. We stepped inside a polished room with glass walls and a long mahogany table that gleamed under soft lights. Ethan and Brielle were seated across from each other, the picture of self-assured preparation. Ethan wore a tailored suit, his tie too sharp, his cufflinks gleaming like armor. Brielle wore her usual lavender blouse and pearl earrings, her hair smoothed into a perfect low bun. In front of them was a leather-bound portfolio bursting at the seams with glossy brochures. Assisted living facilities, retirement care packages, medical expense summaries. I looked at them and felt no rage, just a heavy, still knowing. Noah stood as I entered. He greeted me with a gentle nod, then gestured toward the seat at the head of the table. Maxine settled beside me, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "Thank you all for coming." Noah began, his voice level and deliberate. "Before we proceed with any discussions about Mrs. Mays's future accommodations, there are a few preliminary matters to address." Ethan smiled, that practiced, polished grin I'd seen so many times before he'd stopped meaning it. "We just want what's best for Mom," he said smoothly. "We've done the legwork. Brielle spent hours researching. There's a really wonderful facility just 20 minutes outside the city. Heated floors, round-the-clock care memory therapy programs." Brielle added, "She deserves the best, and it's clear she needs more structure and support than we can give at home." Noah didn't flinch. He clicked a remote and a screen at the end of the room flickered to life. A single document appeared on it. A psychiatric evaluation dated just last week. The header read, "Cognitive Assessment Report. Dr. Lenora Abrams, MD." Noah read aloud, "Patient is alert-oriented to time, place, and person. Demonstrates full cognitive function across all tested domains. No signs of dementia, memory loss, or impaired judgment." He looked up. "This report is from a board-certified geriatric psychiatrist with over 30 years of clinical experience," he said. "Mrs. Mays is, by all professional standards, entirely mentally competent." There was a pause. Ethan blinked. Brielle shifted in her chair. I don't understand," she said quickly. "She's been forgetting things. The other night she asked about someone who died last year." "People misspeak," Noah replied evenly. "That's not dementia. That's being human." He clicked again. The screen went dark, then lit up with an audio waveform. He pressed play. Brielle's voice poured into the room like oil on water. "She's completely gone. We'll say it's not there and cash it ourselves. She'll never know the difference." Then Ethan's voice. "We'll look, and if it's anything, we keep it quiet." Silence followed. Not the kind that falls gently, the kind that crashes, heavy, searing. Ethan turned red, an ugly mottled flush creeping up his neck. Brielle opened her mouth but said nothing. Her tongue had finally failed her. I sat still. I had rehearsed this in my mind 100 times, what I would say, what I wouldn't. But when the moment came, I felt something deeper than anger. I felt release. I stood. My hands rested softly on the edge of the table. I didn't look at the screen. I looked at my son. "You mistook my silence for weakness." I said, my voice steady, clear. "But I was listening, and now I'm done. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to cry. The evidence had spoken. The tape had spoken. My presence in that room, composed unshaken and resolute, was the closing statement." Noah laid a thick envelope on the table. "This is a certified copy of the new trust, and he said, all of Mrs. Mays's assets have been placed in a protected legal structure. She retains full autonomy over her estate. Neither of you are named as beneficiaries. Ethan's jaw clenched. Brielle looked like she might collapse into her chair. "This can't be legal," she hissed, voice finally cracking. "You can't just cut us out like this." Noah raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Mays has every legal right to protect herself. You may contest it, if you'd like the court to hear this recording." Maxine reached over and took my hand. Her grip was warm, firm. The kind of grip that says, "You did it." I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. As we walked out of that glass-walled room, the quiet behind us was suffocating. Ethan didn't follow. Brielle didn't protest. They sat frozen, trapped not by handcuffs or walls, but by the unbearable weight of their own choices. Justice didn't always arrive with sirens or headlines. Sometimes it came in quiet truths spoken at the right time in the right room, by a woman no one expected to still be standing. But I was, and I would be. The silence in the house felt different now. Not the heavy silence of isolation or dread. This was clean silence, sacred almost, like the kind that settles after a deep exhale or a prayer answered in a whisper. I stood at the living room window, hands loosely clasped in front of me, watching as Ethan and Brielle made their final trip to the car. It was raining that day. Not a storm, just that soft, constant New York drizzle that soaks everything in a slow, steady hush. The kind that blurs the outlines of things. They didn't speak to me. They didn't even try. Ethan carried a cardboard box under one arm, the last of their things, while Brielle dragged a rolling suitcase that thumped against every porch step. No one looked back. The emergency protective order had gone through that same morning. Noah had filed it swiftly, and the judge had not hesitated. The evidence was too clear, the intent too malicious to ignore. They were given 24 hours to leave. No contact, no return. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger anymore. What I felt was more precise, more surgical. Relief. That profound, hollow kind of relief, like what a patient might feel after a tumor is successfully removed. The pain isn't gone, but the threat is. The poison has been cut out. When the sound of their car faded into the distance, I stood still for several minutes, just listening to the house, listening to its walls breathe again. Then I moved. I started with the upstairs bedroom. There were still remnants of them scattered across my home like echoes. A pair of Ethan's cuffed socks tucked in a drawer. One of Brielle's motivational books. Manifest Your Best Self. Sitting half-read on the nightstand. A coffee mug with a chip on the rim that said, "Rise and Grind." I gathered everything into one large cardboard box. No hesitation. No second guessing. Just item after item, stripped of meaning, now only clutter. Downstairs, I packed away the nonsense decor she'd insisted on. Those generic prints with pastel brushstrokes and gold lettering. Fake succulents, a scented candle labeled Zen Breeze that never once smelled like peace. I boxed them all. When I was done, I taped the box shut, wrote "donation" on the top in thick black marker, and loaded it into my trunk. I drove straight to the Goodwill drop-off center near Oak Ridge. The attendant didn't ask questions. I didn't explain. I just handed the box over, turned around, and never looked back. When I got home, I went to the closet in the hallway and pulled out a bundle of dried white sage. Sharon had given it to me months ago. I hadn't lit it back then. I hadn't been ready. But now I was. I walked through every room of that house barefoot, carrying a seashell in one hand and the slowly smoldering sage in the other. The smoke curled into corners like a ribbon, gentle and thick, purifying the air. I let it drift over the fireplace where our wedding photo had once hung into the dining room where I had sat in silence night after night. I paused longest in the kitchen. The kitchen had always been my altar, my place of prayer, of love, of offering, and for months it had been stripped of all feeling. I had barely set foot in it beyond opening the fridge. But today I stood in the middle of that space, eyes closed, letting the sage smoke chase out the coldness that had lived here. Then I opened the windows. Every single one. Even the sticky one in the laundry room. The early autumn breeze poured in, carrying the scent of wet leaves and freedom. The house inhaled again. I could feel it. With the air cleared, I walked to the old wooden cabinet where Vincent kept our records. They had been shoved to the side, replaced by Brielle's little white speaker. I took it, unplugged and silent, and gently placed it in the donation pile. Then I flipped through the vinyls until I found it. Chet Baker Sings. The cover was worn at the corners, the sleeve yellowed from time, but the music hadn't aged a day. I placed the record on the turntable, lowered the arm, and waited. A moment later, the soft, honeyed notes of My Funny Valentine filled the air. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I let it out all at once. The sound was like warm syrup over a bruise. It filled the house with something it hadn't felt in months' soul. And then I cooked. Not the steamed, flavorless meals Brielle had rationed out with her sterilized hands, not the boiled chicken or bland quinoa. I made clam chowder, the way Vincent used to love it. Creamy, rich, full of chopped herbs and thick potato chunks. I sliced crusty bread, buttered it generously, and placed everything on the heavy oak table I had once nearly stopped sitting at. I ate slowly, not out of necessity, but out of reverence. Every bite was a blessing. The food didn't just nourish my body, it reminded me of who I was, and who I had always been. By the time the sun began to dip, casting soft gold across the floorboards, I felt something settle inside me. A quiet kind of stillness. Not emptiness. Not absence. Just peace. This house was no longer a war zone, no longer a stage, no longer a hollow space occupied by people plotting behind smiles. It was mine again. It wasn't just a location on a street map. It was an extension of me. My memories were not ornaments. They were roots. My walls held echoes, not ghosts. And my kitchen, with its jazz and chowder and warm light, was no longer a place I feared entering. It was a place I had reclaimed. As I stood in the doorway that evening, looking out at the garden, Vincent and I once tended together, the sage smoke long faded and replaced with the scent of clam thyme and fresh air. I whispered a quiet truth to myself. They thought they had taken everything, but they had only taken space, and now even that, I had taken back. The house is quiet now, but in a different way. Not hollow, not heavy. It's the kind of quiet that holds life, like the pause before a hymn begins, or the silence right after a deep, contented sigh. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your own heartbeat and remember that it still belongs to you. That first Sunday, after reclaiming my home, I woke before the sun. The air felt different, not just outside but inside me, lighter, clean. I brewed myself a strong cup of coffee the way I used to when Vincent and I would rise early to work in the garden. I stood at the kitchen window, sipping slowly, watching the morning mist drift over the flower beds. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't surviving. I was simply here, alive, present. It was time to begin again. The Whitmore Foundation for Elder Advocacy was established quietly without ceremony. No ribbon cutting, no interviews, no photo ops. Just a few signatures, a bank account, and a mission. I insisted my name not appear anywhere in public. This wasn't about glory. This was about building something lasting, something that couldn't be stolen, silenced, or erased. Noah took the reins of the foundation with Maxine by his side on the board. Each week he sends me a package, a plain envelope always addressed the same way. G. Whitmore Private Review. Inside are files stripped of names and addresses, cases distilled down to facts and patterns. I read them the way I once read medical charts. Slowly, carefully, looking not just for symptoms, but for silences, for the things that aren't said, because I know now often the worst harm hides in the quietest corners. One case was about a man in Tennessee whose daughter had taken control of his finances after convincing doctors he was no longer competent, only to sell his house without his consent. Another came from Arizona, where a retired teacher had been moved into an assisted living facility by a nephew who drained her pension to renovate his pool. Each time I read one, I feel the echoes. Different names, different towns, but the same betrayal, the same erasure. And so I make notes. In the margins of each file, I jot down observations in my firm nurse's handwriting. Check for sudden medication changes. Follow up on phone disconnections. Look into power of attorney signatures. Possible coercion. And most often I write one reminder in red ink. Listen for what is not being said. Then I send the files back to Noah along with my notes, and I go back to my quiet life. One afternoon, Maxine stopped by with lemon pound cake and an envelope. "This came to the foundation," she said, handing it to me with a look I recognized, a kind of reverence mixed with restrained fury. The letter was handwritten in neat cursive on lined paper. It was from a woman in her late 70s, someone the foundation had recently helped. Her son had tried to declare her incompetent in order to sell the family farm. With our help, she had fought back and won. Her letter read, "I thought I was invisible. I thought maybe I didn't matter anymore. But then I heard about the woman who started this foundation, the one who stood up for herself when her own family tried to erase her. You didn't just save my house. You saved my name. Thank you." I read that letter 3 times, then folded it gently and tucked it into a wooden box I keep on the bookshelf. Right next to the Bible Vincent left me and the note he'd written all those years ago. Our legacy is love, not greed. It means more now than ever. That night after Maxine had gone and the dishes were done, I sat down at the old writing desk in the den. It had been Vincent's once, but now it's mine. I opened a fresh notebook. Not the one I'd used for documenting crimes, but a new one with a blue cloth cover. In it, I began to write. Not about betrayal, not about loss, but about the things worth keeping. I wrote down the recipe for my cornbread, the one passed down from my grandmother, the way she always said to stir the batter just enough. Not too little, not too much. I wrote about the day Ethan took his first steps across the kitchen tiles, and how Vincent cried harder than I did. I wrote about the time Maxine and I danced barefoot in the rain during a protest, chanting until our voices cracked. I wrote about the moment I heard my own child call me the old lady, and how that very phrase became the start of my rebirth. I wrote because I wanted these truths to live beyond me, because I had learned that if you don't tell your story, someone else will, and they might not be kind. Every evening now I sit on my front porch in the old wooden rocking chair, the one Vincent painted sky blue the summer before he passed. I rock slowly, notebook in my lap, the pages filling with memory and resolve. Sometimes I write. Sometimes I just watch the sun slip behind the treetops and let the cicadas sing the final word of the day. They tried to reduce me to silence. They tried to make me a shadow of myself, to turn me into a cautionary tale or a burden to be handled. They tried to treat me like a folder to be filed away like wallpaper from a bygone era, to be stripped down and replaced. But I refused to be erased. Instead, I became a voice. A quiet one, maybe? But in this world, quiet voices carry the farthest when they speak with truth. And now other voices are following. Other women, other mothers, other elders who will no longer sit quietly while their dignity is bargained away. We are not relics. We are roots. This is not the end of my story. This is the beginning of my legacy. I know this story might have stirred something in you. Maybe a memory, maybe a feeling you've pushed aside for too long. If you've ever been made to feel invisible in your own family, if someone once dismissed your wisdom or tried to write your story for you, then I hope Gloria's quiet strength reminded you of your own. Have you ever been underestimated? Told you were too old, too emotional, or simply not needed? Or maybe you've watched someone you love fade from the center of their own life and you didn't know how to help. I would be so honored if you'd share a part of your journey in the comments below. Your voice matters, truly, And if Gloria's story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to this channel and turning on the notification bell, because there are more stories like this. Stories of dignity, of betrayal, of quiet, powerful restoration. And I would love for us to sit together again to listen, to reflect, and to remember none of us are alone. Until next time, be kind to yourself and to the stories waiting to be told.